Dells area? Is there a record of finding the?
They didn't necessarily go to the Dells. They were here. We have evidence of a village on the north side of the town. They were within the city limits in 1860. There's a census. 1,502 Native Americans were here. Platteville was only a population of about 2,500. On that, a lot of the Indian tribes have been forced into this area also. So one of them was the Cheyenne. They were here and they were very good friends with the Ho-Chunk, which really was considered the Winnebago. So that actually they're referred to as the Winnebago, not the Ho-Chunk. At that time period. But there were 10 other tribes residing within the city limits. So when you figure they're within the city limits, not exterior, because there were 80 family farms at that time, and they documented how many were around the city of Platteville. So we've got that information. We got how many Native Americans were here. We don't have the exact count of the Winnebago, but they were the majority because they were here hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So if you take a look at Dickeyville Bottoms, they're talking like 25,000 Native Americans possible, at least 10,000. And these go back to the Ice Age. So we've been going back into that information. We do know that the village was there over 1,000 years ago. So it makes sense that they're completely saturating this area, but there was a huge concentration of Native Americans here. Getting the information about names and stuff like that, the Ho-Chunk is totally a verbal history. So, and of course, a lot of that is held very tight to them because it is extremely important. So in other words, it's not really divulged. There's not a lot of information that's given out. But the concentration, we're working on where these villages were located. We do know a few people's farms that had them, and they were a large concentration. So when cholera came here, the cholera rate killed a minimum of 22% of the population. So you're talking a minimum of 22% of what was here died. So you're talking a mass amount of dead in approximately a year, but this expanded to over approximately 3 years. So it was an amazing amount of dead that they were here. So the consideration is there could have been a lot of mass burials because so many people died so fast.
If I could just add, thank you, Garry. If I could just add to that, part of the mystery is that the mound in the center is not necessarily related to the cholera burials, but it's not necessarily not related. That is, if it was already a sacred burial ground and people joined the church, for example, then it would just continue. I mean, this is part of the mystery that we're looking at. And the other thing is, even someone like Reverend Lewis, who, as you pointed, died of consumption, but there was a stigma attached to having cholera also. So, particularly if you're trying to get people of European ancestry to move to a place, like I said before, you don't want to announce that cholera is raging through that place.
Garry?
Question.
Yeah.
So it's not known if it's related to mounds related to the cholera epidemic, in other words, post-cholera epidemic burial, or if it's its original shape, it may be a conical mound of Hopewellian period, otherwise possibly, but undetermined.
I can't personally see any way that the mound part would be related to the cholera epidemic, but it could be in what was a sacred ground.
That could take it to Hopewellian conical mound period, possibly then, or which has been determined.
Do you want to, since you've been working on that more? I can say what I would guess, but it would only be a guess.
A lot of this information that's being given has been at least verified in 3 different positions. Now, a lot of this, we have speculation that we have only one piece of document that steers to that. None of this is one piece of documentation. We've had at least 3. A lot of it's been sent to the state. Now, on the Indian burial mound, that's where we're really digging now, trying to get verification of a number of these. The state archaeological department has looked into that. I don't think they're ready to come on board to state definitively that it is definitely. They would have to come down and take a look at it. We're looking at doing more research on that mound. But we do know there's been evidence in at least one document that there were 3 Indian burial mounds within the city limits. 2 of them have been destroyed. One was destroyed in 1965. It was done for a ball field. A ball field. So, I mean, these mounds are very low. We've been doing a lot of research. If anybody knows about the Standing Man, which is the last of this type of mound, it's up by Baraboo. The highway department cut its legs off. It is highly protected now and whatnot. It is the only mound of this type that's in existence, but that thing's only like 6-7 inches tall. So most of these mounds were taken care of. That was held under a park. This was under a park. When you mow across it or you do different things, you scalp it and different things. So these mounds have been lowered. They're putting prairie grass on a lot of them. They're starting to puff up a little bit, so they're becoming more visible. But it's, you know, we haven't got the definitive proof that this is an Indian burial mound, but everything points that this is probably one, but we're still working on it.
And the conical mounds, elliptical ones, would have preceded the effigy mounds, which is the Man Mound Park in Baraboo.
Correct.
Also, it's
Correct.
a different period.
Correct.
Yeah.
I have something from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and they state that the earliest mounds date as far back as 500 BC were round or conical in shape. So I mean, you know, these are really, really old. The mounds are mostly in southern Wisconsin. I got this information from a great program titled Mapping Monumental Mysteries, and it was given by Amy Rosenberg, and she's the state archaeologist for the Wisconsin State Historical Preservation Office. And she quoted, you know, that Wisconsin has more mounds, like Terry mentioned before, than any state in the United States. It's a Wisconsin phenomenon. The mounds were mostly in southern Wisconsin, and in 700 to 1200 AD, they were in the oak savannas. The earliest records of mounds being noticed and recorded was in a 1834 government survey. In 1817 to 1823, Stephen Long was looking for a place for a fort, and he took note of them. And what I found interesting is in the 1840s, every half mile from Blue Mounds to the Lead region had mounds, they noticed at that time period.
The increase A. Latham did much
Yes,
with that.
he was after, yeah.
Would be principal. And at the Man Mound, it was Canfield who informed Latham of that mound, and he included about 1859, I'm not sure about the date, in mounds of Wisconsin also. And as you're talking about, the conical mounds were typically from the period you're talking about were attributed to be Oakwellian in nature. So.
And so where I was going was somewhere totally different, so thank you for all this excellent information. Yes?
There also was an early cemetery where the post office is now. And those were supposed to, bodies were supposed to have been moved, but who knows if they were or not.
Wow, well, if you look on the city website with Indian Park, which I think is the last slide, it says that it's called Indian Park, and that's because of a legend of Indians being buried there. And what I was going to point out, which was far less interesting than what you all were saying, frankly, was that, okay, there's not supposed to be, you're not supposed to have a park on top of a burial ground. So there hasn't been proof that the mound in the center is a mound. I mean, I think it is. But there is certainly proof that bodies were buried there, and there is no proof that they were ever removed. What there is within living memory of not anyone alive today, but the older relatives of those folks, and that's what I'm getting to here, is of people being buried there, but it's questionable whether the bodies were ever removed. Yeah, good.
On your presentation you got, are you going to be presenting about the powwows that were held? Okay.
Yeah, that's what, so this is our 2 different accounts. One is from Laura Graney. Is it granddaughter, right? Should know granddaughter. That's Dick Graney's mom. That she recorded. And then another is from Marjorie Lathrop Livingston, has recorded by K. Tiedemann Young, who I didn't see you here. So these are independent accounts, but they tell of the same thing, of Native people buried in the park, though not necessarily in the mound, in fact, almost certainly not in the mound. And so this is what I was talking about before, that the legend of people being buried in the park is called a legend because they're talking about the mound. But if you realize the whole thing was a cemetery and the bodies were never taken out of there, then it's not a legend. It's verifiable by academic historians, at least. It's an eyewitness account.
They would never remove a body that died of cholera.
Thank you.
Never, ever.
Exactly, and I think that is exactly why the bodies were most likely not removed. And that was the record that Graney had in a slide coming up here of why that they were not allowed to remove the bodies was exactly that. It's because they died of cholera.
There's a difficulty also. You said that Roundtree had not advertised cholera epidemic to recruit miners. Given the zeitgeist or spirit of the times and general cultural attributes, it's unlikely the way the Native Americans were generally regarded at the time by many, that white people would have been wanted to be buried around Indian burial grounds also, I would guess.
So that's another interesting speculation, isn't it?
It's also purely speculation.
Yeah.
Know if the cultural mores of the time lead one to pose that.
So that's exactly one of the things we're pushing on for our next presentation in a couple of months, so I'll bite my tongue for now.
How's it taste?
Shockingly. Okay, so anyway, if we go on here, so both Laura Graney and Marjorie Lathrop Livingston recalled a gathering held, and this date is a guess, but it's a pretty accurate guess. Kay Young, in remembering the age of her aunt when your aunt told you this story, right, and what her age was, it would seem to fit that time. That same time fit, for other reasons, what Laura Graney was writing down. And in both cases, there's a memory of, well, there were houses being built near there, and there were tensions between the two populations. By that time, if you look at the census, the native population is a minority population. And so if you have that timeline, this also corresponds to what was going on in 1918, which is where there was a vote to remove all of the bodies from the cemetery, which is how it winds up being a city park because, well, with a few more twists and turns, but the bodies were removed. It's not a cemetery, except there's no record of the bodies being removed. And I think, exactly as you said, I mean, I think it's a pretty safe speculation that the bodies weren't removed because there were people who died of cholera. On top of that, as we'll see in a moment, that was the memory of Laura Graney, and that is how Thomas Aiken's headstone winds up there.
The bias is also shown by the second to last paragraph. They hollered to keep the white people away. Highly unlikely. They were doing their indigenous ceremonies, and that was their perception, cultural perception of Caucasians and Holocaust.
Oh, I would completely agree with you, but I also wanted to remain true to the recollection of the recollection. But yeah, a white person in the area wouldn't know that this was a ceremony going on. It seems very likely that there was a ceremony going on. And we could speculate about what that ceremony might be. I'm not, as a white person, going to speculate. I would like in a couple of months to come back and say, this is what someone who is Ho-Chunk might speculate that it would be. Yes.
In the newspaper article you're referring to, it does state that the drumming went on day and night, 4 days.
Right.
The drumming. So in other words, the
Exactly.
drumming was continual. This isn't something that was just something going on with some chanting and stuff, but there was drum beating.
Right.
So it was definitely a powwow. There was a reason it was there. It was big medicine.
So for those who couldn't hear Gary, I think that's a real important point, that the memory of Laura Graney is of drumming going on for days and nights. We are, by the way, if anyone else has an older relative who would be deceased by now, but who remembered that and you remember being told that, please come talk to us, because we'd like to see how other people remembered this event. Now, some of the speculations then would be what was the ceremony. I'm going to hold off on that one. I can tell you what there aren't any records of that I know of was of Native people coming in and digging up and a bunch of bodies. All right, I'm sorry to be gross about that. Okay, so was it a sacred burial ground? And sacred burial ground obviously can also be a Christian burial ground. Was it a mass collar grave? Was it both? So this is that last, this is from the Parks and Rec page, and when it is referring to the legend, I just wanted to point out again, local legend states a Native American is buried in the middle parcel. But the evidence and the historical evidence for it being a cemetery don't really concern that center mound. I think it's extremely likely it's a mound, as you have said and as Garry has explained and as Kristal has added to. But it's a cemetery because of the at least 30 bodies buried there that there's no record of ever being removed. And in fact, there's not a record of the names of a lot of them, but that would also be consistent with them dying of cholera. So I wanted to end by showing you some of the work that Laurie Graney, Dick's mom, did in insisting that this history be known. Some of you remember probably in the 70s there was a column, Platteville Folklore. So there was this particular article. It was a very interesting article about Roundtree. I've cut the bottom of it off. If anyone wants it, Laurie's got a copy in her big red book there. But this person was Alona Kinji.
She did a wonderful job talking to the 6th grade every year.
Awesome.
The stories were good.
This one was great. But she says, is talking about Roundtree giving the park, it became impractical to use it for a cemetery, so the graves were dug up and moved to Hillside Cemetery, right? What was Hill Cemetery was moved to Hillside Cemetery. And they left one Indian buried in the middle. Well, you can see why there would be that slight mistake made, or maybe there still is one Native person buried in the middle, I don't know. But, so Laura wrote this letter to the Platteville Journal, which they published in April of '75, correcting the error, saying that there's no bodies left there, and saying, well, there's at least 2. And from what we can find, as I said, it appears there were 30 by that Lancaster article. So after this was when they put Thomas Aiken's headstone up. Now, none of this answers what that other stone is doing there. It looks like a gravestone, but no one that I know has been able to read it.
One thing to remember about Alona, it's folklore. And I tell her stories to the 4th graders every year now.
Yeah.
But they're good stories, but they're hard to prove a lot of them.
Which, yeah.
But they're still interesting.
No, it's a good
Off the subject, but not really. John Lewis, we think, was buried in Hill Cemetery.
Yeah.
Church records say Hillside Cemetery,
Mhm.
but his work is in Greenwood.
Oh, yeah, that's another little twist. Could you all hear Bill
No.
there? So he was saying, Reverend John Lewis, it's, the church records say he was buried in Hillside Cemetery. We're thinking Hill Cemetery, but actually his marker is in Greenwood Cemetery.
The interesting,
And also, we'll update on this, his plot. And his lot wasn't purchased till 1955.
Yeah.
By the way.
That's a hell of a situation for a
It is a hell of a situation, and you know, I think that is a good place to open things up for questions. Yes?
One, have you ever approached the archaeological department at the UW about doing ground penetration radar scan of that area?
So you all have records.
Repeat the question.
He's asking if we've ever contacted the archaeology department at UW-Madison And the answer to that is we've talked to people at the Historical Society who have told us that there has been too much ground disturbance, you know, soil being moved in to fill in and whatnot. So it would give a lot of false positives possibly, or vice versa.
Last fall, when they had to put a storm sewer on the Court Street side, they had to bring a state archaeologist down, of course. And so the four of us went and sat behind the caution tape. And when Terry showed that picture of the sidewalk, after they dug into a little bit into the park where the sidewalks start coming into the park, not very far. And we measured that for like 18 to 24 inches possibly. It was amazing that there is another sidewalk underneath what looks like, now I can't say for the whole park because they didn't dig it all up, but that section that goes right along with the one that's there now, the part that they dug up. So I'm thinking, okay, if they did fill it in, and then we found a lot of brick, there was brick, when they dug up the street sidewalk that went along with the park, there was a lot of brick in there. So we have to check into that further about ground penetrating radar. Now, we don't know if the whole park was filled in like that or what, but I thought that was very interesting that that sidewalk ran right along with the sidewalk that you see today there underneath. So that's a fair amount of fill, and then there was brick in there too.
The brick may possibly have come from when the brick school burned in 1953. You know, that's...
Yeah, we were there when the archaeologist was there. We could see where the ground changes color and everything, so we know we've gotten to the original ground where the level was, because you can tell where the changes. We've got the archaeologist, all his notes. He allowed us to copy all his handwritten notes. He's now putting them into the state, I think the state archives. I don't know if it's all been done yet, but there's between 18 and 24 inches before you hit the actual original ground surface. Now that's on that side of the street. We don't know about the other side. Now, as to when this brick came in, we did collect 4 bricks from it. Now, a lot of the brick was done in the Platteville brickyards. So we're using that brick and the firing means and the type of clay and everything else to try and find out where this brick came from. I guess it could have come from the old brick school, which is about a block, a block and a half away, approximately a block. It could have come from beforehand, or it could have come from the city hall when that burned. Now, these are both time periods much earlier, so we have no idea where this come from, but we do have brick that were quite low in the digging, and we saved them. So in other words, we're going to do a brick analysis. That'll give us more of a determining time of when this fill came in. But also on this ground penetrating radar, we've approached a number of places that does this. Lawrence University has one of the best. And he said the disturbance, the infill and stuff, that's a problem. This site had a number of large trees at one time. Most of the people that have been here a long time can remember it. This was extremely shaded. So in other words, there was huge trees on the property also, which is typical of a mound. They're not in a sunny area in general. They're in a wooded area. So in other words, we've got a lot of evidence that we have to evaluate to determine exactly when the time periods were that this happened. But the sidewalks are showing right exactly where they are. As to what happened on the east side of the property, we don't know. So in other words, we haven't dug it because this is something you don't do. You don't disturb anything. So in other words, you have to have state permission on a lot of that. And we have been approaching a number of places to see what can be done to determine this, because a lot of the Presbyterian cemeteries during the 1850s, some of them have been designated in the last couple of years and given white high honors. They're the same thing. These are Presbyterian burial sites, and the Presbyterian Church changed to congregation. 3 years after the Congregation Church was founded in Platteville, the Presbyterian Church re-resurrected and started to being found and held their church services in City Hall. So in other words, you've got this interlocking of churches going on, and the Presbyterians didn't take a stand against slavery per se, but the congregation was outright. And then you've got to figure this all happened in 1848, 49, 50, around there, and the state became Wisconsin, one of the states in 48. So you gotta see, there's a lot of stuff happening, anti-slavery, everything else. But these cemeteries are showing up all over. There were Congregational Presbyterian mixes, and they were cholera burial grounds. So there's a lot of information on cholera burial grounds if you go in and take a look at it.
Will they be doing trace element studies on the bricks?
Pardon?
Will they be doing trace element studies?
Yeah, we're gonna be doing that, how they were fired, what temperatures they were fired, what materials. And we do know approximately where a number of these brickyards were. There was 4 brickyards in Platteville. So a lot of the brick we determine is probably from that. So if we can find out what kind of brick, when the buildings went up in Platteville, what buildings are still standing that were using the same brick at the time period, we're gonna try and blend it in and find out where this brick came from, this infill, because it's all been dumped all at once. It wasn't over a long period of time. It was infilled over a short period of time, and you're talking a couple feet. So you're, well, 1.5 feet or more. There's dirt on top of it, so you're figuring there's at least a foot of brick. And when you use ground penetrating radar, you're out of luck. Now, also, in the problem with ground penetrating radar, which we were told, is most of these bodies, when they killed, sometimes they wiped out an entire family in 24 hours. The death rate was extremely fast. So in other words, these people were dying really fast. And so there's mass burials that have been found in a lot of other places in the cholera struck. So you can see anywhere from 1 to 6 people buried in one hole. Most of them just had linen or canvas wrapped around them. There's no evidence of any wood or anything. And a lot of times they just put up a wooden cross. They're deteriorated and whatnot. So in other words, a lot of the evidence in these burial fields, there's mass graves. And so they buried a lot of people.
Well, your trace elements will show you, if they're locally,
Yep.
that they are indeed dead, much the same as if you wanted to know about isotopic trace element studies of various ore bodies in the district. You can tie it to specific ore bodies, the Hayden part of the property of the
And
Shelford mine, etc. It's very specific. It's usually, unless they're long transport things, you can't find the source.
And these fields are specific to the colors, shades, fires, everything, and each one fired different. So you're going to see that evidence in the fire. Correct.
Gratiot's Grove, I think in the last couple of summers, if anybody's following that on Facebook from the Berry Tavern, they have found cholera burial field or a grave mass in their checking. But that's on Facebook. It's under the Berry Tavern. Friends of Berry Tavern, I think, is the name of it if you want to follow that. So that's pretty close. And there's other ones that I know there's one in Shellsburg that they found. There was an article on that. I think Dennis Wilson put an article on that.
Well, and that's kind of where I was going in evading an answer to your question, which is usually they wouldn't be burying Native people and people of European ancestry in the same place, but if people are dying of cholera, I think safety. I saw another hand somewhere. Yeah.
Does anybody remember a brick sidewalk running through there? I sort of remember that fence you're talking about around the center. I went to school at the old high school, and that's part that scared the shit out of me because I'd run through it every time when I was little. That's when all the big trees were up yet, because it was still wooded up until whatever. But it seems to me like there was a round, still brick around the fencing, or not? Like I got that totally wrong.
I don't remember the brick.
Okay, I can't remember to say either.
In the mid-70s, the wrought iron fence was still there for sure, because we used to cut through there all the time coming to Oy Gray.
Yeah.
So that fence was still there in the mid-70s, I know that for sure.
And what's your name, sir?
What's my name?
Yeah.
Kurt Timlin.
Nice to meet you, I'm Terry. I just wanted to, that's a further forward date, and that I wanted to tie it down to. Does anyone else remember anything about the park looking different than it does now, those of you who have been here a while?
Are there any photos with the actual trees still being there?
We haven't found any.
That's
It's
too
terrible.
bad,
It's
because
terrible.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of woods
So
in
we
that park.
Big
posted, I
trees.
think Laurie posted a request on Bill's Historic Platteville Images asking, and Roxanne Light said she had one, although she hadn't expanded
Not
in.
of the trees,
But of the fence, you're right, I'm sorry. You'd think there would be.
I'm not sure when they put it